Warning: continued listening to the Joe Gilder Home Studio Corner podcast may result in increased production of music, creativity, and extended interaction with other musicians. Other reported side effects include spontaneous songwriting, singing in the grocery store, a generally optimistic and creative outlook, and repeatedly explaining gear ads to random strangers in the streets. Do not operate heavy equipment while under the influence of Home Studio Corner unless it is a drum kit, Hammond B3 organ, or a stand-up bass, or heavy metal if that's your thing. So, sit down, lean forward, bring your questions, and get ready for another episode of the Home Studio Corner podcast with Joe Gilder. Use only as directed.
Oh my word. Oh my. That was terribly good. So everybody, that is Jim Edgar, longtime Ask Joe attender. Just awesome. So Jim was gracious enough to record that, which is just really well written and well done. But also to give it to us and let us use it on the podcast. So if you want to check out more of Jim's work, you can check out jimedgarvoices.com and go see what all he's up to. I got a sneaky suspicion that Jim does voiceover stuff. So the gauntlet has been laid down to the rest of you folks. If you want to send an intro in, just shoot me an email. Don't attach it to the email, but like send me a link so my inbox doesn't explode. But I am totally open to more of these, so joe@homestudiocorner.com. Okay, so this is the first regular episode since I got back from NAMM. We did the thing with Jeremy Casella last week, which had all sorts of technical weirdness. I think it was just him. I think he exudes some sort of magnetic field that interrupted everything. But turns out it wasn't the recording, it was just the stream. So if you go back and listen to the video or the podcast, it is nice and, well, fairly clear. Doing the one mic thing with both of us didn't work out super well. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. Hello. Welcome. If you've never joined us before and this is your first time, you're wondering what is happening, I do a weekly podcast called Ask Joe that I've been doing for a few years now, and it's exactly what it sounds like. I sit here in this chair and I answer your questions, and we do it live on YouTube. And that's where I get all the questions. I used to get them emailed in, and that was fun, but it's kind of fun to get the live vibe going. So if you can make it Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Central Time, I know that's not good for everyone, but it's good for these folks who are here. I see Alex Dixon's here. What's up, brother? So maybe you can join us one day on your lunch break, or if you're in Britain, on your dinner break. By the way, I'm drinking tea, and I need you British folk to tell me the right way to do this. I'm intrigued by this whole tea thing. And I'd like to tea better. So show me how to do that. Okay, so let me talk about a couple of highlights from NAMM. I am a horrible, horrible YouTuber. I did not shoot a video while I was at NAMM. I flew in an airplane out to Anaheim, and I saw a bunch of my buddies and saw a bunch of cool things, and then I flew back and, hang on, let's turn that up just a little bit. Flew back and I decided while I was there, actually on the way there, I'm not going to kill myself to shoot a bunch of video. I would probably like to just maybe be present and to see my friends, make a few new friends perhaps, and then maybe see a few pieces of gear. So I literally went to just a handful of booths. I know that sounds insane. There's booth after booth after booth and room after room and building after building full of toys. But there just wasn't much I was interested in, and I was much more interested, I sat down with Graham Cochran for a couple hours just to talk business and life, and he and I, even though we're business partners and do a lot of things together, he lives in Florida and I live in Nashville, so it was nice to sit down with him in person, really in person. I could reach out and touch him if I wanted to, and maybe I did, and it was really great. So got to see him. I can't list off all the cool people I saw, but people like Lidge Shaw, who lives here in Nashville. We go to LA to hang out. Pete Woj from Mix Better Now. Chris Salim from Mixdown.online. Matt Boudreau from Working Class Audio Podcast, which is great. Of course, Bjorgvin from Audio Issues. Who else? I saw Warren Hewitt briefly. We shot a little bit of a video as I passed him on the sidewalk. And Graham, of course. And then my friends at Presonus. And then I went to a few booths of people that had emailed me that said, hey, I'm a subscriber, I'm a customer, I work for a guitar company, come see our guitar. So I did that, which was fun. but didn't do a whole lot more than that. Probably the one fun thing I did was I went to the Mix with the Masters booth, and when I walked by, Eddie Kramer was there. So he's doing a quick mix on an SSL board, which was pretty cool. And then he just took questions for like a half hour from the audience, and there was a decent-sized crowd. So people were asking him all sorts of stuff about working with Zeppelin, working with Jimi Hendrix, and he's just a funny old dude. He was really quirky and really had a lot of energy, and I enjoyed watching him. It was funny hearing him tell a story about doing final mixes with Jimi Hendrix. They would have 16 channels on a board, and there was no such thing as fader automation. So if anything needed to turn up and go down, if you needed to ride the vocal, you had to do that as it was playing back. So they would play back from the multi-track machine through the mixer, and then that would record down to the half-inch or quarter, whatever, the 2-track machine. And that was how you did your bounces, right? So if the vocal needed to come up and down in different sections, you had to ride the vocal up and down. So they would literally say, all right, Jimmy, you're in charge of these 3 faders. I've got these 6 faders, and then we're going to switch halfway through so I can do that guitar solo ride, all that stuff. It was a performance. And a little tiny part of me wants to record an album that way. I don't care if it's on analog tape or not. That seems like too much work. But to pretend like it's on analog tape, like record it into PreSonus Capture and treat it like a tape machine, and then to mix it through this mixer and treat it like an actual analog mixer with no automation and perform the whole thing. And to me, that seems so much like if I go back and listen to a Jimi Hendrix record and I'm sitting here listening to this thing and then remembering the story that he told about how like Jimmy was like they were swapping places in the middle of the mix and Jimmy like falls on his butt in the floor and like Eddie's falling over to grab the master fader for the final fade out at the end of the song. Like that to me is so much more interesting than, so I created all of this automation and then the system did it for me. Of course, that's how we all mix now, and that's totally fine. But it was just fun stories like that, really, especially about big classic records like that. It's just kind of fun to know. The other cool thing was back with Eddie Kramer, he was talking about somebody asked him. Well, there's lots of questions about recording. Oh, recording John Bonham. Like, how did you approach recording him on drums? And he kind of said a few things and talked about a few things, but he said the thing is, you put a microphone on John Bonham in front of a kit, and it's going to sound like John Bonham. And he almost to a point of saying it really didn't matter what I did as the recording engineer because it was going to sound great because it was John Bonham. And I leaned over to Graham when he said that and said, did he just admit to not being that integral to the sound of Zeppelin? Which is kind of funny. Of course not. But he kind of was getting to the point of mixing is much more important than recording. He kind of basically said recording's kind of easy. It's the mixing part that is where it really starts to shine. And I think there was a little bit, obviously there's a lot of truth there, and it kind of just hammers home that point I talk about all the time, to get it right at the source. We want to hear him say that and say, he's right. I must get really good at mixing, and then we continue to make bad recordings and then wonder why our mixes don't sound good. So you got to start with John Bonham if you want your drums to sound like they were played by John Bonham. And I know that's maybe an over-exaggeration of the problem, but that's kind of the reality we live in, and I think it's kind of fun to think about it. So there you go. Boom. You like that little fancy editing I just did right there? On the fly, baby. On the fly video editing. I would be horrible if I had to work for like a news crew, like cutting and splicing video live of like the Super Bowl as it's happening. But here on the YouTubes, where no one can stop me, I'll do some tiny little bit of editing. Sorry if things are a little bit louder for you than they're supposed to be. I'm trying, but okay, so let's jump into your questions. If you have a question, ask it in the chat, and I will get to as many as I can over the next 20 minutes or so. The whole point of this, it's not about me. I want to really make it valuable for you. Whether you're asking a question or whether you're just getting into this and you want to know, chances are you have the same questions people here have. So if you're here in the live chat, ask your question because there's probably somebody else out there who's listening who has that question and isn't here to ask it. So they're relying on you. So don't let them down. Let's see. Inside the Mirror asks, do you believe huge artists have a bunch of unfinished project in the corner as well? I would think so, but I think they may have a lot of songs. I think when I see interviews with especially people who are like songwriters and artists, not just performers, it seems like a lot of them, and this is such an overgeneralization, but they're completely writing music all the time, and maybe they're recording things on the side and they're trying things out, so that they're really just always creating in between making albums. And to me, that's really inspiring and fun versus only limiting it to stuff that will be released. I don't know. That probably is not a great answer. Sorry. Will Paxton's here, says, my question is, what is your current favorite song? What's your jam? What's my jam right now? Oh, you got me on the spot. I've really been jamming out to, let's say, hone it down to an album. We'll call it the new The War on Drugs record. And then I think it's the song called, not The Space Between, but there's got this killer guitar solo. I forgot the name, but that whole record is it's really fun to listen to. And he's got like 7-minute songs and it just works, which is just awesome. So we'll go with that one. Alex says, what do you do when you haven't made music in a while and you're scared of getting back in the studio? You get back in the studio. There's no other way to do it. You can't prepare yourself for it. You just got to jump back in, and you get it on the calendar, and you be as specific as you can about what your intentions are. Just sitting down and pulling up an old mix and moving faders around, that's not really doing much of anything, and it's not helpful. You might as well go watch TV if you're going to do that. But if it's get in there and write, don't make it something huge like I will sit down in the studio and write an entire album. Maybe sit down and say, I'm going to come up with a cool hook if you want to write something, or I'm going to record that vocal part that I've been thinking about for 2 years. I'm going to lay it down and see what happens. I really don't think there's any other thing. I get the fear. Please, trust me, I am riddled with fear a lot of the time. But one good solution to that is to do the thing that's giving you fear, because a lot of times fear is a compass that points you where you need to go. Sometimes. Now, if you're afraid of jumping in front of traffic, I would suggest not jumping in front of traffic. But otherwise, creative fear, I say do that thing. Josh Wigan says, do you have any experience with Studio One Artist? Is Studio One Professional worth the upgrade? Josh, I've not used Artist. I kind of just always did Professional. The big thing with Professional, and I'm not good at knowing all the specific differences. Having the mastering page, the project page, that alone, if you're going to do any mixing and mastering, is super nice because of the way they integrate together. Being able to use third-party plugins, not as important to me, but is important to a lot of people. That's something that you don't get with Artist. And then there's just some plugins that aren't included. I can't remember which ones. I don't think you get like the multi-band compressor in Artist, and you do get that in Professional. So if you're using Artist and you want to do something with multiband, you can't, because you can't use third-party plugins, and there's not one included, at least last time I checked. So those are some of the reasons. But if you're just getting into it, then I say stick with Artist and just go as far as you can go with Artist, because you can make great music with Artist, right? Paul says Artist is also 32-bit, Pro is 64-bit, which I still don't quite get what that means or why that matters, but I'm sure it does matter. I've talked about this before. My friend Ben Gortmaker, who, by the way, has a new record on the way. He's recorded it. I think it's like releasing somewhat soon, so I'm sure I'll tell you about it. But he did a record years ago and recorded most of it in GarageBand, which is so limited and it's beautiful. So don't let that be the thing holding you back from making music, but if you bump up into those limits enough, then I say upgrade to Pro and be done with it. However, I would also challenge you, if you have Studio One Artist, and let's say you are, just for argument's sake, you're a musician, you're a songwriter, and you have not recorded and released a project in Studio One Artist, I say do that first. Let that be the next thing you do, whether it's a single or an EP or a full album or something, or a client project for somebody else. Do that, and then as your reward, get yourself the professional version. I'd much rather do something like that than just upgrade. Then you'll spend the next 3 months playing around with the new plugins and not making any music, which is lame. Jose David Mora Loria, what a great name, says, quick question, do you prefer having your customers per hour basis for small projects, or is it easier per day, per song? I am, whenever I can do it, I am a per project, per song, per day, per something guy. I don't like the hourly thing, and I don't think clients like it either. If I'm sitting there knowing I'm paying $50 an hour, and if I'm 2/3 of the way through a guitar take and I mess up, that has a dollar amount associated with it. Oh, great. Now I'm going to have to be here for another 5 minutes, and that's 1/12 of 50, which I can't do the math in my head. Was that $6? And no. See, I can't do the math in my head. 1/8 of, anyway. And so I'm always thinking that just as long as the clock is running, that's money. And everybody, like not everybody, even bigger producers that I know who work with really big budgets, when they quote things out, they just say it's this much for this project. And I think it's going to take this long. Come hang out in the studio. So if you're in the studio till 3 a.m, you're not paying more. They've kind of, as a producer, as the person offering the service, you kind of work some of that into your price. So if you think it's going to take you 4 hours, maybe you charge for 6, give yourself a buffer, but then there's that plain price. And so then if it takes 8 hours, you're still making good money. They're not paying more, and it's not this awkward situation, and everybody ends up winning. It becomes this, what's the word? It becomes almost like you're at odds with each other once you go to that hourly thing. Because now they're looking at the clock, you're looking at the clock, and nobody's looking at the music at that point, right? Random Man says, question about dueling mixes. One place on the site says mixes are due at the end of the month. Another place says by the 20th. Give me a real deadline, like 11:59 p.m. on the blank of the month. Good question. They're due on the last day of the month. It used to be the 20th, and we bumped it back to give people more time. Thank you. Shoot me an email so we update the website to show that. We go in sometime on the last day of the month to choose the winner. Sometimes it's on the first day of the month, next month. But let's just say get it up there before the last day of the month just to be safe. And then you'll definitely get in. So we do the drawing on that last day. Good question. By the way, if you're not a Dueling Mixes member, did you know you can get a 14-day free trial? DuelingMixes.com. How's that for a commercial? Well done. Jim, Edgar, I need you to do some of that. Jim actually says, fear is a compass that shows you where to go. Print that out and paste it over your desk. Yeah, there's actually a line in a song I released last year. The song is called It's Okay, or Okay. It's Okay. And there's a line that says, what if all that fear was a compass meant to steer you to something great? So that'd be a good line, too, if you want to print that out and paste it somewhere. Who says paste? This is from Timberland Recording. Where do you suggest to post an online portfolio of the clients you've worked for? That's a good question. I don't do this well. SoundCloud is the obvious choice just because they make it easy, and if you post it on your Facebook, it just shows up as a player, and it's beneficial in the sense that it's pretty ubiquitous, and so you can put that on your Facebook page, and you click, it'll play right within Facebook usually. That's pretty cool. The downside is it's not the best quality. As far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think SoundCloud still streams at 128 kilobits per second, which I'm not this big, I must only listen to 24-bit WAV files. But I can hear a difference from 128, even from that to 192 or 320. I don't really hear much of a difference from a 192 MP3 and a 16 or 24-bit WAV file. It's more subtle there that I sometimes don't hear. But when it's 128, I can hear it. I can say, it doesn't sound great. Now, will the basic premise of the song get across in SoundCloud? Absolutely. Is it better than nothing? Absolutely. But if I was doing it, I'd probably... One thing you can do is create separate YouTube videos for each song. Upload the WAV file. If they listen in HD... on the video, then it will be in HD quality. So you could set up a playlist in YouTube, put the album artwork for the song, and put your contact information, or, I produced and mixed this song, and then put all that in a playlist, and then embed that playlist on your website, and now it's YouTube videos that are playing the music. That, to me, is kind of interesting. Or if you have a website already, like a WordPress site, or one of those other, whatever, Wix, or what's the other one, Squarespace, and they have a pretty easy way to embed a little player that has a play button that will play back an MP3 file. That's probably what I would do as well. Something that will play back a higher quality file, if that's something that matters to you. Otherwise, the simplest thing to do is just to create a set. What's it called? A set in SoundCloud, and then you can embed that on your website, or you can just link directly to it, and people can listen. If the sound quality is not going to be the difference maker in whether they hire you, right? But if it's important to you, then that's something to consider. And yes, there's a limit to how much you can upload to SoundCloud without paying. So if it's just going to be a place to host a handful of songs, it's great for that. Basilio Raw Music says, I've been trying to finish a mixtape. I'm in the middle of recording period, but about mixing, obviously each track's done individually, but mastering all the songs should be together, right? Suggestion? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but yeah, I mean, yes, I tend to mix each song, and then mastering, I'm considering all the songs together. So I don't really start mastering until I've mixed everything, and then I'm listening to the songs on the whole. And like they're all in a session by themselves, and I can EQ the final mix. And then I can quickly listen back and forth to make sure there's a consistency there, and then make sure there's a good gap between songs, all that stuff we do in mastering. Jim Edgar, who is is just all over this episode, says WordPress does have a native audio player. It's pretty stripped down but functional. So yeah, I assume they did. Years ago they didn't. You had to get a plugin to do that. Makes sense that they have that built in now. Carrie says, how are you doing with the DAW mode on the Series 3 mixer? I removed it because if you were here 2 weeks ago live, my board crapped out. So there was a little glitch in the beta. I'm assuming that's what it was. So it took me a long time, actually. I had to go back a couple of firmware versions and do it several times before it finally started working. So it worked well when it worked, like controlling the software and all that. I was able to do a part of a mix through it. But then it messed up and I just went back to using a mouse. So it's promising, but it didn't work well for me. Maybe they have an update I can check out. Tress says, how's your EP going? It is not. I've just kind of said, you know what? I didn't do one. I didn't do the fourth one, and I'm okay with that. I've got other things that I want to focus on that I think are more important right now. One of those being songwriting. So I've been writing more. Actually did a songwriting. Me and 6 friends went to a cabin out kind of south of Nashville and spent the day last Friday. We broke up into 2 groups, and each group wrote a song, and it was super cool. So that was kind of fun. Let's see, what else? I totally lost my train of thought. Do you use Complete 11? And your thoughts. I don't. I used Complete back when it was like version 3, I think. We got like a free copy over at Sweetwater. But yeah, I haven't used it since then. I thought it was cool, and it has a whole lot of stuff. And apparently, I just realized, talking to somebody, it's super cheap. Because I remember it used to be like $1,000, and now I think it's a couple hundred. So that's pretty cool. I just don't do a lot of MIDI stuff. I use MainStage to get basic keyboard sounds, but that's about all that I do. So there you go. If y'all got any more questions, I'll cut it short if y'all going to run out of questions. If you did ask your question and I didn't ask it, I give you permission now to ask it again. David says, what effect has your working out and diet changes had on your ability to mix, if at all? Well, I can sit slightly closer to the desk. Sorry, this is bothering me. I don't know if it's had much of a difference. I think just in general, being healthier makes me a little more likely to be more intentional with my time, which makes me, that kind of feels like a BS answer too. I don't think it's had much of an impact, I'll be honest. I'd like it if it did, but it doesn't. Don Smith says, what are the differences between, so talking about Studio One and a Studio Live 24 AI mixer, what are the difference between universal control, capture, and just recording into the DAW? Universal control is just a remote control, so you can use it to control the mixer. It doesn't have a lot of functionality other than that. You can also save scenes there. You can update the firmware, that kind of thing. The capture is just a very simple, almost like tape machine app that's very light, doesn't require a lot of resources. It's great for just recording. So I use capture, for example, at my church on Sundays when we're recording the service. I'll bring my laptop, I plug it into the mixer, I hit open capture, hit record, and it records the whole service. It'll record all the tracks, or if I just want to record the sermon, I can do that. It's just very simple. It boots up immediately. and it starts recording immediately, which is great. You can't do anything else with it other than open it up in Studio One and do editing and mixing and all that, which is what I'll be doing right after this episode. And the final question, recording into the DAW. That's what I would do in a studio setup. So here, if you come to record an album with me, we're going to record into Studio One. If I'm out doing a live performance capture, or if I'm doing a live streaming concert here, then I'll use Capture, because it's less software to mess up on the computer, because it's just a very light program. Program. That's how we say the word program in the South. We say program. Say it with me. Program. That's a good, light program. Have you ever used MainStage with Pro Tools? See, Eli, the way I use MainStage is you can use it with any DAW, because I literally run out of a little USB audio interface, 1/4 inch, and plug that into my other interface to record into my DAW. So I literally don't use it. There's no digital connection between the two. So I'm not recording MIDI. I'm not able to edit MIDI either. Talked about this a lot recently, but that's how I use it. I use it like it's an actual keyboard, an actual like sitting down at a Wurlitzer keyboard and going to record that in. If I had an actual Wurlitzer, which I would love to have a real like Whirly, I would just play it and the audio would go into my recording software. And if I messed up, I would rewind and I would play it again. That's just the way I do it. I'm not bashing on MIDI. Somebody got really upset that I said I don't use MIDI. They thought I was bashing on MIDI. I'm not bashing on MIDI. I prefer to just record it. That's just me. Copywriting song, what do you recommend? No clue. I don't care. I really don't. Maybe that's wrong, but I'm just not concerned with someone stealing my music. And if they do, I can say, hey, look, here's where I released it 2 years ago. It's clearly mine. Lawyer, help me out. I don't know. Joe, do you ever get your hearing tested? I'm thinking it might be a good idea. Paul, are you thinking it might be a good idea for me to get my hearing tested because you've been listening to my music and you think I seem to not be able to? I'm kidding. I haven't. It would be interesting because we all lose higher frequencies as we get older, which, by the way, if you're like over 60 and are doing a lot of mixing, one thing to keep in mind is typically you've lost some of the higher frequencies. So what ends up happening is you can't hear them, so you jack up those high frequencies in your mixes, and then your mixes sound super bright. You may not be able to hear it, but they are. So it's funny, if I get mixes from Critique, I can almost tell you the age of the person based on how much high frequencies are in the mix. It's kind of interesting, right? It stinks that you can't hear it, but you're going to compensate for that with references and even using like a visual readout to see if there's excessive amounts of highs in your mix. There are things you can do. Totally doable. If Eddie Kramer can still mix at 75, then there's hope for all of us. Paul said, I'm not sure if my hearing is up to par after several decades of abuse in live bands. Yeah, it's kind of scary the way that you damage your hearing and it's kind of permanent. You can't really gain it back. Thankfully, I just never was in many live bands, and the few shows I played, I guess this was 2 years ago, I used earplugs, and it's not as fun, but it doesn't hurt as much. Can't imagine touring, though, and doing that for years and years in big stadiums and not wearing protection, but it's probably more rock and roll. Adam Huckabee says, Joe, in business and in life, what motivates you / keeps you from getting lazy? I get lazy regularly, but I will tell you currently what's really helped me. So I have identified a weakness. If you've seen the video and the post where I talked about my 3 words for the year, one of those words is the word buffer, and that means leaving some space to get things done in a reasonable amount of time. And part of that for me means that I've had to realize that I'm okay with planning things and like planning my schedule, but I'm not great at executing that plan because I don't really answer to anyone because I'm self-employed, so I can blow things off regularly. What I decided to do is I invited my wife Pam to be my calendar czar, which means she is in charge of my calendar and I can't add anything without checking with her first, and then she holds me accountable to sticking with the calendar. That has worked really well to keep me productive, and I would recommend trying something like that. I gotta go. Bye.